There is something your dog relies on that you might not even realize you're providing. It's not the food, not the walk, not even your presence in the way you might think it. Those things matter, but they are not the back reason. They are only visible points within something bigger, something quieter that holds them together. It is the pattern that forms between those moments. The way one thing follows another. The way the day unfolds without needing to be explained. And once that pattern begins to repeat, something subtle occurs. Your dog starts to lean into it, not consciously, not deliberately, but in a way that slowly becomes dependence. Not dependence in a fragile sense, but in a structural one. A reliance that shapes how the world is interpreted before anything even happens. More than an ordinary habit. From the outside, routine looks simple. Almost too simple to matter. Eating at the same time. Walking along familiar paths. Returning to the same small sequences that quietly repeat across days. To us, these can feel interchangeable, even optional. Something we can adjust without much thought, because the surface of the action does not seem significant. However, for a dog, routine is not defined by the action itself. It is defined by the consistency surrounding it. Each repetition adds weight. Each familiar sequence strengthens a connection. And over time, these connections begin to form a structure, not visible, not tangible, but deeply felt. A structure that organizes experience into something predictable. And predictability, for a dog, is not convenience. It is orientation. It is how the environment becomes familiar without constant effort. Why it matters more than you think. The importance of routine does not announce itself. It does not create a clear before and after point. There is no clear change you can pin to and say, this is where it changed. Instead, it builds slowly, almost invisibly, shaping the internal state over time. Because without that structure, the world becomes harder to read. A delayed meal is not just a delay. A missed walk is not simply a skipped activity. These are small fractures in a pattern that once explained how the day moves forward. And when those fractures accumulate, the clarity that the dog once relied on begins to fade. What replaces it is not chaos, at least not immediately. It is something quieter, a low-level uncertainty that sits beneath behavior, influencing how each moment is approached before it even begins. The weight of not knowing. Uncertainty rarely looks dramatic at first. It doesn't always appear as panic or visible distress. More often, it shows up in subtle shifts. A dog that lingers a little longer before settling. One that moves more frequently between spaces. One that watches more closely, as if trying to catch something that used to be obvious. Because when routine becomes inconsistent, prediction begins to fail. And when prediction fails, the mind does not rest. It stays active, continuously adjusting, continuously scanning for signals that might restore clarity. Not because something is wrong in the environment, but because the structure that once made it understandable is no longer stable. This creates a quiet kind of effort, one that is not always visible, but always present. How routine changes the inner state. When routine holds, the change is not dramatic, but it is deep. The dog no longer needs to prepare for multiple possibilities at once. It does not need to stay alert to every shift in the environment. Because what comes next is no longer uncertain. It is already known, in a way that does not require conscious thought. And that knowing reduces internal effort. The body softens. Movements become more fluid. Transitions between moments. Rest to activity, activity to stillness, happen with less resistance. Even excitement begins to change its shape. It becomes less sharp, less urgent, more contained within the flow of expectation. Because the dog is no longer reacting to unpredictability. It is moving within a pattern that already makes sense. The invisible language of repetition. Dogs do not follow routines the way humans follow schedules. They are not aware of time in structured units. They do not anticipate events based on hours or minutes. Instead, they experience the world through sequences, through what follows what, through what consistently leads into something else. A sound becomes meaningful not on its own, but because of what it predicts. A movement matters because it has been connected, over time, to a specific outcome. And these connections begin to form a kind of silent language. not one that is taught explicitly, but one that is absorbed through repetition. Over time, the dog does not need to interpret each moment from the beginning. The pattern speaks for itself, and the world becomes something that can be read, rather than something that must be figured out again and again. When that pattern breaks, when routine shifts too often, the change does not always create immediate disruption. There is no sudden collapse, no clear signal that something has gone wrong. Instead, the effect unfolds gradually. The pattern loosens, the connections weaken, and the reliability that once existed begins to dissolve. The dog responds not with confusion in a visible sense, but with adjustment, more attention to small movements, more sensitivity to changes in the environment, more effort to stay engaged with what is happening in case something important is missed. Because without a stable pattern, every moment carries more uncertainty, and uncertainty, even in small amounts, accumulates. It does not need to be extreme to have an effect. It only needs to be consistent enough to prevent the mind from settling. Not rigidity, but structure. Needing routine does not mean needing exact repetition. Dogs do not require every day to be identical. They are not dependent on precision in the way machines are. What they rely on is something more flexible, but also more fundamental. A stable structure that remains recognizable even when details shift. The timing may vary slightly. The path may change. The interaction may take on different forms. But the underlying rhythm stays intact. And that rhythm is what creates safety. Because when the structure holds, variation does not feel like unpredictability. It feels like part of the same pattern, something that exists within a known framework rather than outside of it. This is what allows flexibility without creating instability. The thing that stays. Routine is easy to overlook precisely because it does not demand attention. It exists quietly, repeating itself without asking to be noticed. It does not stand out in the way sudden changes do. It does not create urgency. It simply continues, forming a background that feels almost invisible. But for your dog, it is not background. It becomes a reference point, a way to understand the day before it unfolds, a structure that reduces the need to question what comes next. And over time, it shapes not just behavior, but perception itself. Because when the pattern is stable, the world feels different, less uncertain, less demanding, less filled with the need to prepare for what cannot be predicted. And that is why it matters more than it seems. Not because it controls what your dog does, but because it changes how your dog experiences everything. Predictability is a kind of headlamp for our lovely canine friends. The more information shift to knowledge in their mind, the more predicted pathways appear in front of them, as if strong headlamp light.